Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we're going to be talking about some very interesting topics close to our hearts in many different ways. The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch is our main kind of review point for today. It's a documentary about area in Utah that has a significant history, hundreds of years, decades at least, of scientific investigation and scientific, let's just say, paranormal activity of various kinds. And it's just going to start us on the topic of, the role paranormal activity has or should have in today's world, in the scientific world, as well as in a world of uniting all humanity together and saving the world in whatever way we can, coming together to solve the biggest problems. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Martin, do you want to give us a quick intro on the Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch or anything else you'd like to jump into as we start?
Right. So the show is something that I think is a very interesting development. And I'm saying it as somebody who was, when I was growing up, was watching X-Files and all that stuff. So I do have some knowledge of the, let's say, genre, even though this particular genre is pretty broad between fiction and documentary depiction of reality. And that was actually the point of my bachelor's thesis, was trying to define the genre of a conspiracy documentary movie. So it's sort of related. And as part of that, I was actually going pretty deep into the differences between genres. And some of these things are particularly difficult to define in terms of what genre this is, because there's always, with these paranormal things, there's a question of, even if they call it reality show, reality in quotation marks, there's always the question of to what extent is it fiction? To what extent is it documentary? To what extent is it even something like mystification? Like something that's pretty big and was historically pretty big, particularly in Czech culture and Czech Republic, sort of before it was cool everywhere else. In modern examples, you could even sometimes expect or suspect, I guess, that's something like a Borat level mystification, that there's like a person who's made up a character as their identity and is specifically doing nonsense to fool people into showing something or behaving in a particular way, or trolling for sure. So there's always a danger of that. In the case of Skinwalker Ranch, I think the interesting development is that they put the reality part of the reality show title and removed the quotation marks, and are actually trying to depict reality. And they even keep explaining specifically the extent to which what you see is not exactly what happened, to make it clear that just how not very different what's depicted is from what actually happened. Sometimes it's just sometimes what actually happened couldn't have been filmed properly the first time or something like that. And when I say they, what's most important is that the person in charge of the project is Travis Taylor, who is an actual astrophysicist, I think technically his main degree is in optical physics, and is the kind of person who builds stuff engineering-wise that goes into space, and it's a very credible person. This is what's interesting in terms of his education, his background, his work, and therefore it's somebody who definitely doesn't have any need to tarnish his reputation needlessly with something that's obvious BS, and is not very likely to be engaging, just in terms of his background, is not very likely to be engaging in mystification, like intentionally misleading about anything. And it really seems, I've also watched not just the show, but interviews with him specifically about the show. And it really seems like when he's sort of explaining a bit of how the sausage is made background in the interviews, it really seems that the only difference, the main difference between what you see on the show and what actually happens sometimes, is that sometimes something even crazier happened that they weren't comfortable actually putting into the show, rather than that it was really boring and they were making up stuff. So it seems to be the opposite kind of problem, where they try to hold back to not necessarily deter everybody from being potential future guests, helping them with the investigation in the future, as Travis Taylor specifically explained a couple of times. So to get into the historical background a little bit, it's not just that there have been decades of investigation already at this point by a prior group that was had different owners, different person in charge. The person in charge of the initial investigation was Bigelow, who is an aerospace billionaire, or at least millionaire, if I understand, multimillionaire, if I understand it correctly. And that investigation was more involved with, let's say, the intelligence community, and it was more secretive about what was going on there, although they didn't keep everything secret. They did at various times publish various, but mostly stories of what crazy stuff has happened. They weren't so big in providing evidence for what they detected, which is one other reason why a new, more open investigation that's actually showing all the data was needed and makes a lot of sense. But before then, it was owned by just regular people who were trying to raise some cattle, and they were driven off, at least based on their testimony, they were driven off the property by the paranormal activity, which included pretty much everything you can think of. It's so much so that it's even if you were like making it up, you probably wouldn't be making up something so diversely crazy. Rather, like, if you were making it up, you probably would be sticking to one flavor for the paranormal. But there were UFOs and cattle mutilations, which is, I guess, you would stay in this lane if you were making this up. But then there were portals opening and werewolf-like creatures jumping out of them, and poltergeist activity, and objects. Poltergeist activity meaning specifically objects disappearing and reappearing at places and times where it was basically impossible for them to get there, and lots of weird visions and lights having psychological effects. And one of the funnier things that happened with specifically bulls was that at one point 4 big bulls were stacked on top of each other into a locked trailer or compartment, where it was essentially impossible for anybody to get them there that way without them being dead in the process somehow, because otherwise cows or bulls generally have a tendency to not want to be stacked on top of each other Tetris style in tight compartments. So a bit of a trickster element. Like at one point, some of the earlier researchers reported hearing strange languages being spoken, or somebody communicating with them in an intelligible way, but psychically, and saying things like basically taunting them, explaining that the other force or whatever it is has the advantage there, saying something to that effect. Was the only intelligible communication that was reported, I think, by one of the Bigelow's researchers. So all kinds of things. And then in the show, they also explain, it actually goes into history, like further back, UFO sightings, particularly in the Uinta Basin, which is named after Utes, one of the Native American tribes in the area. And there's a whole even older background, specifically the area of Skinwalker Ranch, which is pretty much in the middle of the general area of the basin. Was that there was a feud between Utes and Navajos, I think, and that there was a Skinwalker curse put on the property by the Navajos because Utes were enslaving them with the help of the American government or something to that effect. So that's pretty much as far as back as that goes, even though, of course, local Native Americans have all kinds of their own legends, but that's generally considered just mythology. Of portals opening, people traveling between worlds and stuff like that. And there are some very old, what do you call it, carvings in the stone reliefs in the area, which are hard to date how exactly old they are, because you can't date stone. Could be thousands of years even, but definitely many hundreds of years. And which depict the strange things depicted in the sky between the stars and stuff. So there's everything. For a very long time, as far as the recorded history goes, a lot of all kinds of like witchcraft curses, aliens, UFOs, portals, you name it. And to just conclude the introduction, the show right now is it's been the property was bought by a new person, some kind of property developer, who's presumably very interested in this kind of stuff. So they decided to do the show in part to help fund the research. So whatever they're getting from making the show is in large part supposed to allow them to do it in the first place. And they're doing now using all kinds of weird advanced measuring devices all around the range, including digging. There's a whole thing with digging, which we'll maybe get into later, but doing all kinds of investigations above the ground, beneath the ground, on the ground, and showing everything that happens. Or like I said, well, not everything they manage to document, and some maybe it's too crazy a little bit even for them to just say that it happened, but they tried a whole bunch of stuff. And in the 3 seasons of the show so far, a lot of super weird things was actually recorded, and it's almost constant that something's happening there, which again is not even normal of the shows where they're making it up. Yeah. So like Ghost Hunters or something, Ghost Hunters would like run somewhere and be like, ooh, there maybe was a person died here 10 years ago, and they're listening for electro voice phenomenon, and then nothing happens, and that's like maybe the episode. So again, if you were making it up, you probably wouldn't be so bold in lying, is my opinion. So that's the show and the wrench and the mythology of it.
That's a really good summary, Martin. So let me just throw it. I'm gonna try to play the skeptic role today, because that's definitely a little more of my my take on paranormal stuff in general. So watching the show, I liked it. It was interesting. There's definitely lots of parts that, because they're trying to be so scientific and they're trying to prove that it's not just, like Martin said, it's not just fiction that they're making up or they're overacting. They're really trying to kind of do it like scientists. And in some ways, it's almost a little boring. You have to kind of fast forward certain areas. I definitely fast forwarded a fair bit of where it got a little slow sometimes. So it's hard to, in some ways, it's a good thing because it kind of gives it a little more, truth perhaps. But in other ways, it's not great for storytelling. It's not great for entertainment value in some ways. So it's kind of like they're shooting themselves in the foot in some ways. But then from the skeptic side is you kind of wonder, maybe they're doing that, just to try to kind of get in on the truth side. Maybe they're trying to do all these things. How do we convince people, while still having a flare of fantasy, and they're trying to find a new way to hoax people, like a scientific way. And we have to have all these scientific things because all the past hoaxes never worked. The Ghost Hunter things, the X-Files in some ways was very popular, but I think most people realize that a good chunk of that is probably not true. It's kind of fantasy. So I guess this is kind of a really interesting show where it's trying to, change that line somehow. And again, whether it's actually happening or not, I have no way of knowing for sure. I don't think anyone can know for sure 100% that they're, telling the truth with all this stuff. And I'd like to think that they are. I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt that this stuff is happening. The really interesting thing that I found from the skeptic point of view is very little of what was happening was duplicatable. Or like they could prove it. Like they would get these weird readings, or this weird one thing would happen, or they get a weird light in the sky, but then it wouldn't happen again. Until
I guess that's a good point to get into patterns, because there were some things that tended to repeat, and they were pretty excited about it because precisely in this field, replication is a big problem. Because there's a whole theory that even if those things are real, there might be a reason why they don't exactly do the same thing twice ever. Because you can have a real phenomenon that's changing up what it's doing. That's if it's intelligence is adaptive. Doesn't have to be a dumb phenomenon where you do an input and same output always happens. Intelligence can mix things up. But one of the big interesting ones was that every time they shot up rockets into an anomaly that they found in the air through their measuring instruments, every time a UFO appeared. And I can assure you that's the most replicated UFO sighting ever in the history of all paranormal investigation. Yeah. You normally are not supposed to be able to do that. That's kind of a biggie.
Yeah. So give them the benefit of the doubt for now anyway. Let's assume that they're actually telling the truth and all this stuff is actually happening, like they're saying. It's pretty big. It's a pretty massive thing. And I would think that, more people would get involved, more governments would come in there, and they get more funding and really try to figure out, make some kind of contact with these aliens or these UFOs in some way. That would be amazing. Like that would be absolutely amazing if they actually.
Presumably, possibly, what they're trying to be negotiating for future development of the show. They definitely did talk, and that's why I think it's also important to look at the interviews, specifically of Travis Taylor about the show, because you get a broader understanding of what they were doing actually. Yeah. Exactly. And one of those things is that they are, I think, currently in the process of negotiating some advanced, genuine satellite survey of the area, where you would need like government level resources to be able to pull that off. And also they did one of the episodes of the show. They did notice that some sort of government surveying plane was flying over the area unscheduled and was trying not to be noticed. So that's it's very, very likely that they are being observed, and they thought for sure that they are being monitored.
I really wonder what it would take, like what kind of proof is actually beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt would it take for the entire world to kind of accept it, or like say 90% of the world to accept it? Yeah, that's true. That's actually happening. It's not fantasy. It's not falsified, fiction or whatever.
I guess you could, like normal scientists, like Travis Taylor's philosophy, and he was explaining it on the interview specifically what his philosophy is about this. His philosophy is that, but I guess he has the motto on the show that his mother used to say that hornet's nest isn't interesting until you poke it. It's a pretty wild attitude, actually, but I guess for a scientist, it can lead you to discover something. So for him, it is like an adventure. That it's a dangerous thing that sometimes feels terribly dangerous as you're doing it, but it's kind of at the price you have to pay for having a chance of discovering something new, because his philosophy is that if you have all these data points, because a normal scientist, even skeptical scientist, shouldn't be denying repeated measurements. In that, because then at that point you kind of have to do, and I guess some skeptics did do it with when the pilots, the Navy pilots, were explaining lately their UFO encounter, the one that everybody keeps talking about still 2 years later. So they assume, some of the skeptics pretty much said that they don't believe all of the Navy pilots. Then you have to assume that, a whole boatload of expert military people is just lying about at some point, because at some point you kind of cannot deny that measurements have been made. And then the question really is what it would take for skeptical people to accept that it is a proof of something in particular is, I think, the more important question. Once you get over these, like, we kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt if it's accredited scientist doing research and it doesn't show any obvious signs of lying and has no reason to lie. So you kind of have to accept that the data exists when there's so much documentation. You kind of have to accept that the data exists. And then the question is, what is it a sign of? And many skeptics seem to have an intuition that they keep acting upon, that because the data doesn't fit into any the existing models of physics, therefore there must be some kind of mistake, that the data can't possibly be interpreted correctly or measured correctly, even if people are honest who are involved in the research. There must be some sort of interference that if you actually understood what it is, you would understand that, nothing unusual is actually here. But some of the data that Travis Taylor keeps saying on the show just doesn't make sense and have any explanation. Like when you measure a certain level of what is it specifically that they measured? Microwaves. Like specific level of microwaves at a particular location has no way to be generated. And then, but I can still do triangulation, and they triangulate it from multiple points. They figure out where it's coming from, and it's like a mile above the property, which there's obviously nothing there. So how is a source there is something that you can't explain. And from the point of view of Travis Taylor, the key thing is, so if there is data, anomalous data that is outside of our current models, then perhaps we have more science to do. So the question is, I think you would have to figure out a theoretical model on the basis of the data that actually puts the data into context and is an explanation of what physics this is.
Yeah, I think that the best kind of reasonable explanation I can do it, again, speaking as kind of a skeptic that's just assuming that they're telling the truth, and that, for now anyway, unless we can prove otherwise, for assuming that everything in the show is relatively true, the best example I can come up with is there's some kind of, testing zone that a UFO, some kind of cloaked UFO is there, kind of testing this area for various kinds of things, with their United Federation of Planets, and there's something going on in this area that basically
it's a cloaked bird of prey, and they came to save the whales.
Perhaps it's something like that. Like, that's the only explanation I can come up with watching the show. There's got to be some kind of UFO there that's it's completely, not allowed to make contact directly, but it's still kind of there watching humanity. And this happens to be the spot that they came down, and that's their posting essentially. They're not allowed to go anywhere else. This is their, the area that they're basically allowed to do their their research from their own, and maybe it's even some kind of parallel dimension in some way, or
that's the theory of Travis Taylor. I guess theory is hypothesis. It's not an established scientific theory, so that there aren't skeptics jumping on what I just said and saying, but it's not theory, it's a hypothesis. Yes, I mean hypothesis. So his hypothesis is that could be some kind of wormhole, and which would explain why it can't move. He even found sort of that the location is interesting geographically, in that Skinwalker Range is exactly in the middle of a basin which is shaped as a satellite dish. So maybe it's just a focusing point that the geography is actually a kind of a generator for the phenomenon. Even like in that case, it could be natural. Like the geography could be naturally concentrating energies in a particular way that creates something. Even if it was a wormhole, it could be naturally occurring because just the geography is causing it. So if it's a wormhole, it would explain why it can't move somewhere else. It would also explain why we can't just see it or easily detect it. I think the closest he got to what it would take to detect it was in the episode where, okay, so maybe it would be a gravitational anomaly, so it would be warping the background, the stars in the background, much like the relativity was actually proven by sun during an eclipse. You could see the stars being warped by the gravitational field of the sun. So this kind of thing. And so he invited the 3 local astronomers with advanced gear, and then their gear kept specifically malfunctioning so that they can't record anything through the portion of the sky that's the anomaly, to an extent that they claim specific stars were being deleted one by one from the memory of the devices as they were trying to focus on them through the anomaly, even if they could focus on them moments before when the stars were outside of the anomaly. So that's one of the best, I think, tests that was attempted. And the sort of crazy way in which it was thwarted would be even suggesting if there were some intelligent countermeasures that, like, yeah, maybe that was exactly the test that would have worked. And that's why it would be so specifically prevented from working. In that case, it could be either into a different point of space, in space, or wormhole could be a connection to a different point in time or to a parallel universe. Like then the options, because of our lack of proper understanding of such advanced physics, it's still super open. What would it be? But if it's a wormhole that requires the geography to be generated, then that's a pretty solid hypothesis why it would be there and why it would have to stay there and just have to be resisting attempts at being probed.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's kind of very similar to the cartoon Gravity Falls. I don't know if we've talked about that one.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a real world Gravity Falls in some small way. For anyone who hasn't watched that show, go check it out. It's on Disney Plus. It's awesome.
Yeah, let's hope that the entity behind it isn't Bill Cipher.
Let's hope it's not Bill Cipher. I don't think we haven't got anything quite that far yet, obviously, but it's getting to the point where we just don't know, and it almost makes you want to hope that they're just making it up. And that's the funny thing, because it's kind of scary if they're not in some ways, and it does make you wonder that if any of these things actually do break open, if we do ever actually open that door to see what's on the other side, then somebody comes pouring through and takes over the world and says, oh, okay, you're no longer protected by the Prime Directive now that you know.
Sure.
We're allowed to take it over.
Maybe there is a Cthulhu at the other side or something. Like it's sort of interesting as an experiment, like the show as an experiment in what the civilization does. You basically make a TV show that is probing, like a poking Cthulhu who's asleep or something. This is a TV show. It's a sort of a thing that's almost like Rick and Morty style of craziness, if it turns out to be anything like that. Although I think it is a great sign that it's not killing people. Yeah. It clearly has the capacity. If there is an intelligence and what they're saying is happening, then and some of those things that happened to them that even got them hospitalized were attacks, it seems that the attacks were calibrated so that they don't kill, just try to scare off.
Just try to warn them away, saying you can't know what we're doing here. It's important that you don't find out about us. Back off a little bit. But it is interesting. So let's change gears for a little bit. So I really kind of want to open this discussion to almost all kind of paranormal, let's say, research or scientific paranormal. What's the word you use? Paranormal investigators. Paranormal
investigations, if you want to speak generally.
Yeah. So I think this is definitely an area that we need a very specific part of our TruthWorks site, maybe for trying to analyze which paranormal investigations are kind of, I guess, good or truthful, and which are kind of, maybe falsified or fantasized a little bit more, or fictionalized a little bit more, just to kind of get attention, right? And there's definitely a monetary incentive for many of these paranormal investigators to, make up the results, or at least balloon up the results to get more attention, because they get more funding. And I'm kind of reminded a little bit about this $1 billion lawsuit. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened.
Sure.
A couple weeks ago. One of these guys, I can't remember his name. It was for the he was trying to. It was the hoax of all the people that they were saying that they their kids didn't actually get shot. It was a school massacre. I think it was Sandy.
Oh, Sandy Hook, right?
Hook.
What's the name of the person? Super infamous.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody knows. I can't think of the name right now. But anyway, it was huge news. It was huge news just a couple of weeks ago, where he had a $1 billion lawsuit, and the plaintiffs won, saying that the stuff he was making up was clearly false. It was clearly, not true in any way, and it was libel or slander. And so from the same kind of perspective, the paranormal people who are kind of saying things are true and kind of, getting tons of money from people, in a similar level, like if you can kind of prove that they're making it up, or prove that it's not true, and they're essentially stealing money from people, then that's kind of a potential way of combating some of the falsities that might be.
Sure, but I would just like to demystify this whole thing a little bit. It isn't that complicated. There was a lot of language specifically devised around this issue by skeptics, but I don't think necessarily to clarify it. I think there was a lot of biased language invented and a lot of double standards invented, when all you needed were the original standard for everything. And the original standard is don't lie. Exactly. It's quite simple. Like, we can say simply, we have liars who lie, who make counterfactual claims. And I think the issue I got in the paranormal arena, and I will be using quotation marks a lot when I'm discussing these terms, because none of these terms are good, is one of my arguments in my upcoming book, which is about astrology. But I do have a whole chapter, I guess couple of chapters, about the disambiguation of terms like supernatural, like paranormal, like you can even have the variations of like proto-scientific, pseudo-scientific, all these words, and how none of them have good definitions, including if you just start the first double standard that makes it seem like this is something different than usual science, is the Carl Sagan's motto of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The problem is he didn't define what extraordinary means. And nobody can satisfyingly define extraordinary in a way that's not biased, is my argument. And not just mine. You can find analysis on the internet by various scholars, who some of which I have quoted in the book, who already are explaining it, that this issue is needlessly overcomplicating and obfuscating what's actually going on here. What's actually going on here, what Travis Taylor is doing in his own mind, is just a scientific investigation. In science, there's always something that's beyond our current science. And one of the best ways always to try to expand science, move it forward, is to find an anomaly, something that doesn't behave according to the currently defined rules, and be poking it. And then maybe you'll get some data that will give you some idea how to formulate an update of the theory that would probably not completely invalidate everything that's been established before, but just like shift the perspective, so suddenly different mathematics makes different sense of the whole thing. And it's like Newtonian physics versus relativistic physics. Relativistic physics puts things into a completely different context, but Newtonian physics within their own context still work and are still being used for basic stuff. So when you say paranormal, what does that mean? In science, skeptics could say that paranormal claims are those extraordinary claims, and so you need not just the normal level of evidence, but that's the problem. In science, the scientific motto is claims require evidence. There's no extraordinary in there, because extraordinary is a perspective, is a point of view, is a subjective, qualitative judgment about things you think personally are more outlandish than other things. And there's always somebody who dislikes it. So paranormal doesn't really help as a term. It's maybe a word that would be actually scientific word would be an objective term that describes something objectively without any bias included. And in this case, I really think it's more like anomalous is the term. Anomaly is an objectively definable thing in science. Anomaly is something that objectively you can demonstrate is happening that doesn't fit into your existing scientific model. and there's every legitimate reason in science to study anomalies. I think is the correct language that people should be using about this.
I agree 100%. I think the reason, again, back to the Sandy Hook thing. So I think the reason that's interesting is that if you can apply that same kind of logic towards, science and, let's just call fraudulent scientists who are pushing their own clearly false things or provably false things for their own personal agenda or their own personal, money. And if we can kind of make more examples like that, Sandy Hook thing, out of the fraudulent guys, people who can be provably fraudulent, then maybe we can kind of start to develop more trust in the actual truthful investigators, because the fraudulent ones are all either going to jail or paying billion-dollar fines, more often than not. So it's less incentivized to lie.
Sure. I think that it's just the issue is just how much bias and how I would put it, spiritual stakes there are in this whole situation for everybody involved. Because for some people, if you're a believer, then this thing, if it's real, could be demons. It's a little bit of a joke in the sort of paranormal investigator community that everything is demons.
Yeah.
But you don't really know, like until you sufficiently scientifically explain everything about, or most things about the phenomenon, even while factoring in that if it's an intelligence, it could be deceiving you and could be manufacturing evidence for you to think, to arrive at the wrong conclusion about it. So there are some people who just don't want these things to be poked for reasons that are fundamentally not just unscientific, but in this particular case, anti-scientific. So there are some people who just don't want these things to be investigated. Some people who even would be inclined to investigate them, but would have 100% preconceived notion of what these things must be or can't be. And I think skeptics fall into this category by and large, is that they have very strong biases that they don't want to acknowledge are biases. They just want to say, no, that's just scientific understanding what I have. It's just objective, rational, reasonable thinking that I will now proceed to defend using logical fallacies. Is usually how that discussion goes. So there's a lot of people with scientistic is the term bias, that it's they claim what they have is just science, but it's clearly reaching beyond what just science is, or going sometimes against specifically what science requires. And then so the religious people with the whole demon thing, but then you have people who are the government, and that's a power element. It's like, okay, so wait a minute. If this is real, I want to control it. And I don't want anybody else to have that power. And in this case, knowledge is power. Because if you understand through data, formulate a theory of wormholes, and you figure out how, not just that this is a wormhole, but how exactly wormholes work, that's a pretty advanced knowledge on a pretty high level of power if you can master it for yourself somehow. So you have these various groups with conflicting interests that's for different reasons end up doing similar effects on the discourse, and they're just toxifying the discourse, doing a lot of personal attacks, doing, like in the case of the intelligence community and government, releasing misinformation to intentionally cloud the issue with that there's some data that's true. So one of the ways to prevent people to be able to formulate a good theory is to release a lot more data that's untrue. And that's completely confuses the situation. And there's good evidence to suggest that there have been all kinds of the wrong things being done, like skeptics basically doing a witch hunt on a person who was a legitimate investigator, intelligence community releasing misinformation or disinformation so that nobody really knows what even happened, let alone what it means. Yeah. Religious people who were hoarding evidence of something that goes against their belief or destroying it so that their belief doesn't get challenged or cannot be effectively challenged. Yeah. There's like a big question of what are all of the things that Catholic Church has in its archives that they keep secret, because they have every motivation, if they've ever found evidence of anything, and they, for a very long time historically, were in a great position to acquire a lot of artifacts and forbidden knowledge, let's say, and they have a lot of motivation to keep something secret forever, although in their case, they probably wouldn't destroy their, like, bit on the hoarder side. But it's like an open question. And then you have investigators who, in this field, who find connections between, like, so there's a super spiritual witchy place, according to some local Native American people, and the Catholic Church has built an observatory there. And you started finding these like connections, like why would they do it specifically unless they bought into that there's something going on, and maybe were doing their own version of Skinwalker Ranch before. So you have all these, like, you have secrecy, you have raging personal bias, you have people who are outright anti-scientific. And so I'm being bewitched at this moment, probably because I've talked too much about it.
Yeah.
Just a second. So you have all of this, and that's the real problem. If people were just normally, not just reasonable, but if people were not particularly caring about the outcomes here, about situations like this, then there you could relatively easily fix the discourse.
Yeah.
But the issue is all of the actors who intentionally don't want the discourse to be fixed here. And that's not just a conspiracy theory. Like, you can find a million historical examples of somebody doing something in this area that wasn't constructive.
Okay. I like it. I like it. I like where we're headed here, Martin. So I think, again, the real trick for us here as part of our TruthWorks program, because I really think this fits in as one of the big pillars of TruthWorks, and getting our truth tellers or our specialists, or let's just call them unbiased investigators, perhaps, that have no, financial connection, whether something is right or wrong. They don't get paid more or less either way. And that they're unbiased in a way of, they can tell us, okay, based on our expert unbiased opinion, this particular line of study is completely false, or this particular principle. Let's just throw flat out there as an example. I think the vast majority, say 98%, maybe even 99.9% of actual scientists agree that the Earth is round, and that any of the logic or conspiracy around flat Earth theory, forgive me if you're a flat Earth theory. I don't imagine there's many flat earthers watching this, but it's a bunch of garbage. It's a bunch of total BS, right? And I think probably the best example we have for a large, hundreds of thousands of people worldwide that make money off of convincing others that the Earth is flat, based on all these different theories. And I think that's probably one of the worst possible conspiracies we have today. What would you agree? What do you think about that?
There are a couple of points that I wouldn't necessarily 100% agree on. It's not the worst because it doesn't have effects. It's sort of overblown in like how dangerous it is, because it's not particularly dangerous. Like, there's no flat Earth lobby that's going to cause effects, whereas there are hoaxes that have effects, or lies that in science that have effects. Like, for example, there was this guy who did the study that demonstrated that vaccines cause autism in children, and that was total BS, and that has had real world results. I think there was sort of the main defender on the side of science. The main defender of let's say out of the box thinking was Paul Feyerabend, was a philosopher of science, who wrote a very good book, which I definitely recommend, called Against the Method. And that's the best sort of let's say criticism of the scientific method from a scientific standpoint that exists. And he was so good in his arguments against some of the established, let's say, scientific intuitions, that the main counter criticism against him from the side of the skeptics mainly was that, like, hey, Paul, could you please dial it back a little bit, because people stop believing in science, and specifically with the effect of that it can lead, for example, to people who then don't vaccinate, and that leads to deaths. So there's this effect chain of logic. In this case is this one.
I agree. So let me rephrase what I meant. What I meant by worst was I meant that it's probably the most prevalent, that has absolutely zero, reasonable way of believing it. At least with the vaccines and all the anti-vaxxers, you can kind of understand that, they're kind of scared about pumping crap in their body that they don't necessarily know. So I can kind of understand from some extent, why they're doing what they're doing. But from the flat earth theory, it's really hard to understand why they even care. And I think I feel like the whole flat earther stuff is really, like you said, it's some kind of governmental conspiracy to make all these other conspiracies seem more real.
That's another part of it that I have to sort of, I guess, object to a little bit. There might be every chance that some government is fueling it for some reasons like that. But in this particular case, there isn't actually a great explanation of why government would be involved in this in particular. Like, the government has better reasons to be involved in some other hoaxes. But in this case, it's also the main point of objection, actually, is that you can have pretty smart arguments for flat Earth. The issue is that people can be convinced if you're following some sort of logic. How to explain it properly? The person who started the whole thing, I don't remember his name, but the person who started the flat Earth thing was a very good debater. And he was able to use a lot of rational, logically not paradoxical arguments that are convincing if you're convinced by something that's logical and you just can't think of why it's not true. And in this case, where it fails is that you can do countless experiments that immediately prove that the Earth is round. And the real issue is people who... It is not really that surprising that there will be people who would be persuaded by the logic of some of the arguments against roundness of the Earth, especially if you're a suspicious type and you don't believe the governments and NASA and other people who, if they show you a picture of round Earth, you wouldn't believe it. At that point, if you're rejecting evidence, is this the problem? And in the case of this particular theory, and I guess any theory, including anything that's paranormal, the real sticking point is the experiment. It's not really the logic. You can whip up a logic that sounds convincing about any position or any potentiality or any possibility of anything being real. The thing that settles it are experiments. And so you have to be able to do an experiment that actually provides proof or rules something out and do it in a way that people will trust. So there's an additional issue of trust in the institution. Because when you're, for example, the skeptics, especially UFO skeptics, and there has been always a ton of evidence since the 40s that something's going on, and you were ignoring all of that evidence that clearly exists demonstrably, even to a point where you can't even hack Wikipedia to not report on some event or incident taking place because it so definitely took place. You just have to keep saying about all of these hundreds of incidents every time. Everybody was mistaken about every aspect of what happened, pretty much, or everybody was lying, and then that's unreasonable. So if you're doing this in areas like ufology or astrology or cryptozoology, where in all of these areas there was some evidence of something at some point that you shouldn't be just throwing out, if you're being fair, then the people who are on the side of the sort of paranormal investigations are like, I want to believe Mulder types, if I were to quote X-Files. So if there's like, I want to believe people who sort of the counterpoint to skeptics, who can also be reasonable, just they have an opposite bias. So they then see that, and then they, by extension, won't trust any governmental institutions or any official academic institutions, because they see that the people who are the linchpins in their area of interest are full of shit. So they assume that even everything else that's been proven by associated people from the academia is all questionable. And then if you have a bunch of people who don't believe each other's evidence, like in this case, you have the Skinwalker Ranch, and they're claiming, showing, look, we have all of this evidence. And if you don't accept that the evidence exists, then again, nobody can move forward, because they're doing the most they can do. You can't do more than actual on-location experimentation, refining your hypothesis, trying again to get repeatable results. That's the only thing that science tells you you're supposed to do. So I think overall, ultimately, it's more an issue of trust in evidence than anything else.
All right, so this is good. We're getting somewhere. So what I would love to see at some point in the future, and I'm not sure how we could start it or evolve it, but I would like to see kind of a categorized classification of all the different paranormal activity and all the different, let's just say, potential hoaxes in the world, like the biggest ones. You know, choose your top 10, just like we chose our top 10 truth tellers and our top 10 questions. We kind of have another section for, you know, paranormal and or hoax and conspiracy theory type stuff. And each one of the truth tellers, from all their different backgrounds and all their variety, again, maybe the ones with more expertise in certain things would have more weight, but they would all at least get a chance to say, you know, at what level would they trust this particular study or this particular person to be telling the truth? And like you said, that's the key question we're asking. Are they lying? Are they just outright lying to make money? Or are they actually an honest person trying to make the world a better place by telling the truth? And that's really the main point of our Truth Teller site, is to try to categorize what percentage do we think that this is actually true. And maybe it's 80, maybe it's 50, maybe
that's well, two responses. First response, that's pretty much exactly what I did myself when I had a seminar last time about conspiracies and misinformation and stuff, doing this scale from most likely to be complete BS to very good chance it's actually real, but all that's controversial. So yeah, that's a good exercise, generally speaking. But also there's a bit of a conflation of two things there. It's that the fact that the person is being truthful doesn't mean that what they're saying is true. There's a second step. There's also likelihood of the thing that they honestly believe, their honest interpretation, that it's valid. So it's of a more of a steps in the process. But I guess the most important one ultimately is the first one. If you believe them at all that they're trying honestly to like, if what they're saying is data that actually was measured and without leaving out a lot of stuff, because there's a lot of ways the skeptics would usually go berserk about these things. If that's somebody's claiming that they've proven something that they don't like, then they would look into everything, which I guess, sure, it's good that somebody should probably do it, but they're oftentimes, it seems, looking into it to just find the one way that casts doubt on it. They don't keep looking to exhaustively go through everything. And so you get things like, okay, maybe it was an error in measurement, or maybe they just misinterpreted the data. The data should be interpreted in a different way, or maybe they're being dishonest, or maybe there's a conflict of interest. So even though we can't prove that they fudged it or faked it, there's some adjacent reason to maybe assume that they would have motivation for that, and they just go through any possible thing to criticize until they find something that looks negative. Like with to give you an example from a different field, like with Bob Lazar, like a lot of the first attacks on his credibility is a whistleblower, allegedly is a whistleblower who was part of some sort of a UFO reverse engineering government black program. And the first thing that everybody attacked was his credentials, that he didn't really study where he studied, or then later, second step was that he didn't work at the institution at all in any capacity, which are, like, if you're being a little bit Agent Mulder-like, you can think of very quickly that, like, yeah, those are the first two things that the government could scrub from the record. So that's like really shouldn't be the big proof point in this debate, because obviously that could be manipulated. But many skeptics just got to that point. That was the first point where there was something potentially suspicious, and they were like, that's enough for me. I found my reason why this is BS, and I'm not going to investigate. That's so there has to be, if there's like a truth teller doing some sort of evaluation, the evaluation needs to have some sort of thorough standard, so that it's not cherry-picked just something, or just done until a point when you find the first potential problem. There could be some justification in science in that you could say one thing can falsify a theory. Like if there's one problem that's incompatible with the theory, but if you assume that you can be wrong about any one point in your interpretation or assessment of it, or any one point could have been manipulated, you probably still should aim for what's called a meta-analysis, which means that you really go through multiple different assessments of multiple different things, and then you draw a statistical conclusion from all the data.
Yeah. Well, I think the key concept there is that there's always a chance that the skeptics themselves could be lying, because, you know, for internal motives, because they want to be a skeptic and they want to be respected as a skeptic, so they might kind of make up some counter evidence in some cases, or you know, stretch the truth on their own in their own way. So you're right. You do need that kind of meta analysis where enough people, enough truth tellers, you know, are kind of looking at it from enough different angles that we're getting kind of a good overall, you know, percentage of how likely this is to be true. And I think as long as we keep an open mind worldwide, that we just understand that, yeah, maybe there are UFOs, maybe there are portals popping open, maybe there's ghosts, maybe there's climate change is real, maybe the world is flat or round. But the point is, nothing's 100% in any way. And, you know, if we have that open mind, then at least we can look at it, and we can kind of classify it and evaluate it with that open mind, without the bias.
It's really, if I were trying to explain it quickly and simply, I think the bias, what it does with the discourse is that many people try to code people based on what camp they fall in and treat them differently from people from another camp. And it could be doing it any which direction, But the issue is, in reality, it's not that complicated. It's just people who are lying are the problem. It's not a very difficult concept. And charlatan, it's like charlatans don't fall just into the astrologer camp. Charlatan can fall into any camp because, I guess, spoiler alert, charlatan can pretend to be anybody and pretend to be actually doing anything that they're not actually doing. Like you can have a charlatan skeptic very easily. You can have a charlatan doctor is a whole category, a quack doctor. Like the fact that there are quack doctors or charlatans among doctors doesn't mean that doctors don't exist. It's like sort of if you just kept assuming that because some astrologers are charlatans, therefore there wouldn't be anything as a real astrologer in that sense. Astrology isn't a real thing to do. So that's one thing. And also, any agent could be anybody. An agent who sort of secretly has a secret agenda and is manipulating the situation also could be pretending to be anybody from any camp. And historically, you find examples of likely agents and or charlatans among scientists, among skeptics, among ufologists, among astrologers, among anybody, because it's just one thing. There aren't multiple standards. There aren't multiple groups of people. They're just people, and people can be truthful or they could be lying. So it's not that complicated.
That's the nail on the head right there. So the main goal of the TruthWorks movement is to expose charlatans and expose, agents, let's just say, that are not telling the truth for their own purposes. And that's kind of, the charlatans kind of fit in the same category. So we just want to classify them all as charlatans. We need to expose charlatans to save the world. I think that's a pretty good statement. Like if we're going to save the world, we must have a society that works to expose charlatans and lies as much as possible and as well as possible.
Intelligence agencies are not going to like this one.
They won't. But I'm hoping that they'll realize it's necessary. If we're going to solve these problems like climate change and like poverty and crime and World War III being the big one, we have to expose charlatans. We have to get to the truth somehow.
Yeah, we don't have to explode them. That would be a bit too
expose them. We must expose charlatans. So I like it. Let's work on that a little bit though. I'll maybe come up with a template for next time. This might be something good for next week if you think you're ready for it. Is maybe send me a link to what you've done in the past as far as trying to categorize it and trying to find methods to expose the lies.
I'm not sure if I have the presentation still, but I can definitely just try anew and can workshop it. As part of the episode. Could be more fun.
That'll be a lot of fun. And I think again, if we can find that the majority of truth tellers agree that these types of things are lies or are done by charlatans, and we can kind of see over time, the vast majority of people agree, then it definitely opens the door to potential lawsuits against them, make them pay $1 billion for the crime of lying.
There's again another question: what do you want to do about them? And I think always when you say something like this, there's a specific parallel to what skeptics are proposing to do about charlatans as they view them. And there is one thing, like they would make something like astrology illegal. But I think if you understand that the charlatan could be a person in any field, then it's not, you can't easily just forbid fields. You could maybe say that again, real world examples. If somebody has some sort of level of authority that's where he's supposed to be telling the truth about something, but we find out that he didn't. Like in science, it's fairly simple. If you're a doctor, medical doctor, have a medical doctor qualification, and you do a charlatan thing, like the person who did the autism vaccines study that, well, again, I have to put quotation marks, then they lose their status. Yeah. They don't have to be necessarily exploded, like put into a cannon and then shot into the sun. They just need to lose the authority that they are wielding, which are basically, it's an abuse of power is what that is. You have to take away a power that the person is abusing from them. As again, a super. If somebody's a politician and is embezzling, then of course they need to stop being a politician at the very least. Like you don't even necessarily, because there's a whole anarchist libertarian debate about prisons and like how punishments should work and stuff. But if you even ignore that, like just at the very least, everybody probably should agree, who's a reasonable, unbiased actor, that if somebody is wielding a scientific authority or a political authority or any kind of authority, could be an employer in terms of like an economic authority. Yeah. And if they're clearly abusing it, which in the media sphere means lying, about stuff, because it's very different if a person is mistaken. That's an entirely different situation than if a person is lying. And many of the people, even if you could say a whole field, like a flat Earth theory, again, all the quotation marks,
Yeah.
if that field as such is 100% wrong, or as close to like 99.999% not accurate in this universe, then still it matters. Like if the person who's part of it is misled or misunderstood something and misrepresented something, misinterpreted something, and it's just mistaken, it's entirely different what you should do about that person versus a person who's a charlatan or an agent who just cynically, knowingly lies and misleads people and manipulates. Because like those people are the problem. Those are to use a biblical metaphor, like those are snakes in the garden. That's the thing that causes the trouble in paradise.
And again, I think that perfect example is the Sandy Hook example, where the guy was just literally doing it to make money, and it was clear he was lying and hurting people's lives because of it.
Even though, like, Alex Jones is an interesting example because he's kind of a linchpin example in that he's the one that was, I think, deplatformed first, and the one who was hit with a fine this high first. And I think the issue is, even in his case, it's a bit more complex because there are many people who do talk to him, like or would talk to him, like Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman, or like that sort of group of people. And he's sort of a semi-friend to some of them personal friend. And the issue there is he was right about some stuff. He was like this whole career, he wasn't entirely disingenuous. He was partially doing it for the money in some cases, and the Sandy Hook is probably him knowing that he did wrong intentionally. But there were also other cases, like he was very ahead on the whole Epstein scandal thing, because he was very open to such horrific things being possibly true and motivated to try to investigate wrongdoings of such like rich people. So because he clearly wasn't paid by rich people to be confusing things and be covering things up. So even then, even in that case, it's maybe not so binary, as in like necessarily it's not binary in that like a person is 100% a charlatan / agent, or 100% just misinterpreting things, or 100% just true about stuff. You will find people who can be true about a part of stuff, because that's like within a person, you have different biases, different motivations, different goals and agendas. So part of what you're doing could be honest, part of what you're doing could be honest and true, part could be honest and misled, and part could be disingenuous and lying. So I think in there, one of the important things that I think you need is nuance, because if you just did it like the skeptics, let's just burn all the witches, basically, like, let's just throw all the astrologers in jail, then there's a level beyond which you're being too extreme, and the solution is a new problem. And so even in, like, again, cases like Alex Jones, nuanced understanding is something that helps.
Agreed. I definitely think there needs to be some consequence for blatant lying, particularly when it's hurting others, particularly. But even in, it's almost always kind of hurting others because you're maybe making them waste their time and money, which is kind of hurting them, right? So it's always about level of abuse, level of hurt, and level
Sure.
of
That's a point that I'm debating in my book in relation to astrology, is that in astrology, some of the skeptics who would ban it precisely argue in this fashion, that even if it's not, because they have a difficulty proving that it's actually killing people, because astrology is not really killing people anywhere. So they usually default to all the money that it takes away from people, and then you find that it's nowhere near the worst thing, even among everything you could assume is some sort of like charlatanery or whatever word that you could use. So there's like within the sort of So it's like even in the field of the esoteric stuff, it's small potatoes compared to stuff that clearly isn't astrology. So in that, it's sort of arguable how big of a harm it would be in this case, but they could still say, but still wasting money, or they should be, I don't know, taking that money and giving it to astronomers. That would be better for society. Sometimes it feels like what they're actually saying. So, sure, I guess it would be constructed like feel free to give money to astronomers to do science. Sure, there's like no really. I wouldn't say that there's a harm in that, unless it would again cause there to be many more charlatans pretending to be astronomers just to get the money, as it always happens when you give money to something. But in this case, sure. But then what you're really debating is political philosophy. What kind of society do we want to live in? And if we want to live in liberal democracy, not some sort of science dictatorship, then yeah, maybe science isn't the democracy, then gets like a different feeling. If you try to apply it politically, like whatever scientists deem to be wrong is forbidden, then science really isn't a democracy. And it really wouldn't be in that sense. It's a bit authoritarian because you sort of kind of have an authority on truth. So in this sense, in a liberal democracy, people need to be allowed to have vices, even if you define it as a vice. And then the real comparison is between astrology and, let's say, alcoholism. Is this the real comparison? And then every time you do a comparison between astrology and a vice, and an actual vice, then like, yeah, alcoholism kills people. Like you get drunk drivers, you get health effects, and you get all this stuff. Like really, like it's addictive compared to astrology, is way more addictive. So you are sort of bound to lose more money on it and destroy your health and maybe your relations and stuff. And then you look at like astrology, it's just like, it's not that expensive for a person. They can get it for free if they really want to. It's not, it doesn't have direct health effects. It's not, the main problem that skeptics would say is that most of the horoscopes are vague rubbish. So they're saying nothing. And something that's saying nothing can't be giving people ideas to do bad stuff, because it basically doesn't give them ideas.
Yeah.
So it's in that way like one of the safer things you could be doing. So that's the discussions that you get into. That's basically a political, philosophical discussions about the nature of the system you want to live in.
Understood. And you know me, I'm fully in support of liberal democracy and any kind of openness and transparency and free speech. These are all great things that I think the vast majority of society agree. You know, freedom to do what you want to do and say what you want to say without hurting others is a good thing. And you know,
specifically allowing hurting yourself a little.
Yeah, and it's okay. Yeah, vices to some extent, as long as you understand, you know, to some extent, how bad these things like alcoholism and drugs and, you know, hard drugs particularly, as long as you understand, you know, as much as possible, the consequences of your decisions. And that's where, you know, education is so key to any of these vices, is as long as people aren't being charlataned into being addicted to drugs or addicted to alcohol or pornography or whatever it might be that's ruining their life in some way. As long as they're aware of it, I guess they're aware of the potential to become addicted and ruin their life over it, and they're still making a choice to do whatever vice anyway. You know, gambling's another great example where, you know, it can be really fun. It can be a great adult pastime, but in many cases, people spend their whole life savings. And
it's more of an issue that what type of personality you are. There are some people who are likely, or more addictive types of personality, who suffer the consequences. The reason why some of these vices are illegal in most places in the world is that for a normal person, in terms of like a psycho-normal, not psycho-divergent in that sense, but psycho-normal person really can just quit, really can moderate. And then so most of the time, it doesn't really have any dramatic negative consequence. And maybe you then want to have a special way of dealing with the minority of cases where some issues arise. And with something like astrology, you could have the kind of person who will be wasting excessive amount of money by constantly having astrologers write up like what they should be doing all the time. And there is that type of person. But it's not a super common type of person.
You actually got me thinking of another thing I'd like to try to classify on the TruthWorks site is the list of vices as well. You know, just list them all. List all the biggest ones, the ones that are kind of the most dangerous, the most addicting, or the most kind of abused, you know, and kind of list them down and have each truth teller kind of chime in. How bad is this? How good is this? And what do you think about this particular?
No, it's like it seems to be clear now that we should do a bunch of scales.
Yes, I love scales. That's the whole point. Is nothing's black and white. We're middle ground. We're trying to understand how gray something is, or how black, or how what all the shades, 50 shades of truth.
Like if you did some sort of a scale of vices, then you'd find that something like astrology would be on the harmless end of the spectrum, and something like harder drugs would be, or some forms of gambling maybe, or would be at the extreme end of the spectrum. And then you sort of would put things into context. And so then if you're talking about, so like there are 6 worse things that are legal that are worse than astrology, vices, therefore probably is fine to be allowed for people to have it. It's going to be like a very sensible, contextual way to explain the place of these kinds of things. And with that's a lot of with the paranormal stuff, like because skeptics are irritated by all of it, by ghost hunters, even though I guess many of them have sort of a soft spot for ghost hunters sometimes. Some of them have the soft spot for UFOs, but mostly ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, which are sort of creatures that allegedly exist, but probably have there's some issue with, like, evolutionarily speaking, doesn't look like a thing that should be living in that particular area. So there's some sort of scientific issue with that, and there's no solid evidence that it lives there, only accounts. So, and then astrology and all forms of divination, which includes numerology and a lot of crazier stuff like I don't know, crystal balls, reading tea leaves, or crystals. Whatever anybody wants to do with crystals. Crystals seem to be able to do anything you want them to do. And at that point, like, even there, you would have a scale within this field. And do you know what the worst thing is with worst effects if from all the sort of new age stuff? What's the worst, potentially, most dangerous?
No idea.
It's any promise of a magical health treatment. Like the kinds of people who say that I can use crystals to heal your cancer.
Snake oil,
basically. That's the so even within that field, and it's sort of indicative. My first encounter with skeptics being crazy about this was a Czech article which was named "Astrologers, Ufologists, and Other Charlatans," and sort of throwing everything in one bag. Of course, it's like one of the worst articles I've ever read. It's like debating why is a great showcase of logical fallacies and bad arguments. And even there, a person who specifically started with astrologers, because I think he was astronomer or astronomy adjacent person. So he specifically put that word first. So that's the worst. And then he was explaining how astrology is the worst. Every example of a harm that was in the article was from faith healers. There was basically no example of anything substantially negative being done by ufologists or astronomers, which yes, I guess there's a common theme between astrology and ufology because there's space. But other than that, there's nothing in common. There's like a super very little in common. There's like one high-profile astrologer person who is adjacent to UFO stuff in a significant way, and a sort of super funny example. It's a bit of a wacky person, even by any standards of ufology or astrology. I think her name is Laura Eisenhower, and it's important. The last name, yes, she's related to President Eisenhower. She's his, I think, granddaughter or something to that effect. And she basically says publicly and believes that Eisenhower, the president, her relative, had the meeting with aliens and made some sort of alien treaty. And she's an astrologist also, but calls herself an intuitive astrologist, which is like, I don't have enough face palms that I can make with my face about the term intuitive astrologist, like as if like astrology was such a strict and rigorous and constraining science that you had to be intuitive about it, which means like basically I'm just winging it. It's astrology, but I'm admitting that I'm just winging it. So that's like the wackiest person who's the connection. But other than that, it is just no connection between the two things. So even like within the scales, it's not necessarily if you try to categorize, because of course in philosophy and science, categorization definition is very important. You need to do that properly or you don't even know what we're talking about. And in this case, if you were doing the scales, I'm not even sure that ufology would exist on the same scale as astrology at all.
Okay. Well, this is definitely a new project. I think this is definitely something we want on the TruthWorks site. We have to kind of think of how we're going to frame it in a way that it's easy for people to kind of click on a certain thing, read the quick thing about what it's about, and then kind of quickly rate it in their own truth-telling way, what they feel about it. Give it a scale and maybe a comment as to how they feel about that particular.
Sure, but other than just rating, because it's my issue with many of the social media designs, they're avoiding argument, they're avoiding actual explanations of stuff, they're avoiding long form explanations and discussions. But that's really what you need to have. If you just like everybody clicks a button and we have a number, that's something. It's not nothing. You can have some sort of scientific arguments or wisdom of the crowd. Like if many like not expert people, many laymen. If many laymen guess, and it's really many of them, then oftentimes the average of the guesses is pretty good, even by expert standards. And sometimes a small group of experts would do worse on a sort of rating of something than a huge crowd of there's some science to that. So it's some value to such estimate if you get sufficient numbers, just statistically. But other than that, it would be important to properly give all of the context, like everybody justifying their decisions. That's something that's very common in if you're doing debate judging. In debate judging, ideally, you're supposed to write down in many formats. You're supposed to write down reasons for why you made a particular judgment. And oftentimes it would be ideal if on the ballot, so-called ballot, that you get with the result, it's not just your votes, but there's basically your like structured summary of what the debate even was. And there's a way how to like indicate it with points connected with each other, some logical symbols and stuff. You can basically chart a particular problem, diagram it as part of your explanation, which really shows as a window into your thought process. You're explaining your thought process. So the sort of high-level truth tellers would be ideal if that's what they were doing, if they were explaining their thought process on particular things, how they arrived at the conclusion.
That's a great point. So what we could definitely do is incentivize, that level of reasoning. So the low-level truth tellers could just kind of go through it quickly, answer the survey. What do you think about this? Yes or no? The slightly agree, moderately agree. So that's
the term. That's what it is. Survey.
Yeah, we can start with that survey, but then the high-level ones, the top 10 or the top 100 that eventually become our high-level truth tellers, it's essentially their, career to kind of give us reasons for each of these things and to kind of help guide the discussion in a good, unbiased way for all the other truth tellers to kind of look at and say, oh, I agree with that. I'm doing more research, and now I can kind of give a better statement as to why that is or is not likely true.
Yeah, basically they should be, of course, referencing evidence and stuff like that. Like stuff that you do get in something like Wikipedia, that you can't just say a thing. You have to have a point of reference, ideally, where it's coming from. Although Wikipedia does seem to have some sort of arbitrary limiting rules to how that works. Like I can't, for example, I believe you can't, as like if it's a page about you can't be editing information about you. It's something like that, which sort of led to many of the profiles of people who are enemies of the skeptics being totally hijacked by the skeptics, and they can't fix untruths that are then put there by somebody who doesn't like them type stuff. I think you always Wikipedia would almost, I think, need, so if you're doing something similar, I think what you would basically need is a point of view of the person who's being described, like their own point of view on what thing is. Like in a law situation, you have to be able to allowed to make a defense for yourself, because like you can't have a context without the person being attacked being able to defend themselves.
You need both sides. So and any of these lists that we come up, we definitely have to have at least a section for somebody who's opposed to the norm, let's just say. So say 98% agree this is false. You might have a section for the 2% that can go and kind of make a reasonable argument as to why and defend that particular thing, to say, yeah, only 2% say it's true, but this is why. And I would like to be a defendant, or I would like to be
it's pretty much like you could have basically lawyers, people who are just there to be doing the steel manning of positions. They wouldn't be invested in the outcome either way. They would just, their job would be, because that's basically lawyer's job, is to not care really whether the person has done or hasn't done the crime, but really do the best they can to defend them type stuff. In the context of logical discourse, you don't necessarily have to go to that full extreme, like even knowing that the person is full of shit defending them. Like you don't have to do that, but you kind of have to do steel manning, which means the best justifiable version of the.
Excellent.
You're supposed to be attacking the steelman position. And there's another thing that I remembered. Way back when I was sort of with a bunch of my friends, we're thinking of, in the olden days, of starting a different, because eventually I ended up starting with my friends debate organization. But even before then, we sort of, with different friends, tried to, or thought about starting a different debating organization. I think we're a bit ambitious. It was supposed to be a galactic debate league. It's like if you were just try to scale it up, like try to create a debating format that if aliens arrived at the planet, you could get involved and still be covered by it. So it's like a bit ambitious. But within that, there was one position that you would basically get a person to be a demagogue, to intentionally play the role, play the part of the demagogue and try to come up with all the most manipulative, cleverest, bad arguments, so that then the other people within the debating organization, like the students, the debaters, or other judges, would then try to defend themselves against that, or try to whip up the sort of, to tear apart the sort of best effort of a demagogue, to sort of explain, try to find, like workshop it, like to try to find like the most devious arguments for the wrong thing, and then sort of the devil advocate type stuff. So it's like really try that up, but also then at the same time put even greater effort into also explaining why, okay, so this is the best we could come up with if we were evil, and this is how we're tearing it to shreds. So that like even if in the wild somebody was trying to be manipulative, you would sort of be able to come up with the worst arguments before them, and already immediately at the moment that you came up with them, immediately destroy them. Like, so it's like to make it clear that sort of to nip it in the bud, just like to prepare people for being sort of like a mental self-defense to the extreme. So like sort of try because I guess some people didn't like it in the more conservative debating organizations. It's like, you should never even attempt doing a bad argument, because what if you convince somehow inadvertently with the bad argument type stuff? But that's like, somebody in the world is going to try it. Yeah. It just like was my thought, I guess, back then was my thought that maybe if it's part of the education process, or in this case, it would actually fit maybe quite well into something like TruthWorks. That you would have somebody who would be trying to anticipate the bullshit that like the charlatans in the world would try to come up with, and we would like preemptively be spending time diffusing it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, that's 100% what our goal would be, is to educate people on how to combat charlatans, how to combat demagogues, how to counter argument them, and understand where they're coming from, understand that debate, making debating cool again. That's one of our best videos, I think. It's gonna come back. All right, well, let's we've talked a lot today about a lot of different things. That was great. Let's kind of circle back to wrap up the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. I don't even know if this will be part of the same video or not, but is there any other final comments you'd like to throw out there? It was a really interesting discussion. I think it remains to be seen whether they'll have any conclusive proof about any of these things. It's all kind of really good, scientific study and scientific results, but nothing really conclusive that I could see.
Yeah. I would say that I guess we can talk a little bit now at the end about some specific things that we found interesting in the show that we saw, so that it's not super general about it. I would say, to your point right now, that yes, I think seeing science in progress is important by itself. You don't necessarily have to ultimately find the answer at the end. I think it's one of those, it's about the journey, not the destination necessarily, even though many scientists, Travis Taylor probably, would really like to get to the destination. But just watching the journey, like what it's supposed to look like, it's like a good education. Okay, so if we're actually seriously trying to investigate paranormal phenomena, so anomalies, anomalous phenomena, so how we should go about it, like what is the right way to try to investigate them? And I guess in their way, it's sort of the show is a workshop in like figuring out, like as they go along, figuring out like how to approach it, because one of the things they needed to figure out was security concerns, or specifically, okay, so if what we're studying is an intelligence, then it can be mean and try to harm people who are poking it. So there was a lot of concern about if they should dig or not, because there was this superstition that bad things happen when you dig, which the first time Travis Taylor heard it, he was like, are they like kidding? Is this some sort of like joke? Like, are you being serious? It's like, but what do you mean we can't dig or bad things happen? But then they attempted digging a couple of times, and a couple of times bad things did happen. So it's interesting how they eventually got over it, and it's just like accepted that there's going to be maybe some negative thing happening. But they did, for example, at one point figured out that maybe we should have like a safe room, and they had a silo which was a pretty strong Faraday cage, because they assumed that maybe if these attacks are attacks, then it's some sort of radiation attack. So if we feel that there are some sort of symptoms going on of this kind of attack, then maybe we should go hide in the shelter. Which is interesting, like it's exactly the kind of thing you would have like on a spaceship. You would have a radiation shelter precisely when some sort of like attack or like storm in space, like a solar wind or something's picking up, and then you would, if there's radiation hazard, that's exactly what you need to have, and would just try to weather it in that. So they sort of figured out some like safety protocols. Like there's a one of funny idea that I had while I was watching it. You could get then, if Faraday cages work, then you could get the crazy people who do you know Arc Attack?
No.
Like a musical band. You should definitely investigate. Those are people who are doing the music played by Tesla coils.
Oh, okay.
It's super cool. Like try Googling Tesla coil Imperial March from Star Wars. It's just, for some reason, movies which had like a lightning battles stuff, the music from those movies is really nice played on Tesla coils. For some reason, I don't have a theory why that works. So those people they would have 2 Tesla coils, for example, and then one of them would be in like a chainmail type Faraday clothing, and would be in between the Tesla coils as they're playing the music, getting hit by lightning with the music, because they're completely shielded and grounded. So you could pretty much have, like what I thought of, you could have like a paladin in like a chainmail armor, like medieval style, which would be the Faraday cage armors would be the point of the armor, and then you could call them Faradins. So you would have like an anti-magical unit that would be running around in Faraday chainmail, and could have like a sword or something that's just like a lightning rod that's just concentrating the lightning, and so it's just a thought I had. But it's interesting for me, like in these specific details. Like for instance, another patterns that I didn't mention, everything keeps failing. Like all of the devices keep failing, and I guess that's the one thing that you could theorize to some extent could just be natural phenomena in the area, just electromagnetic flux or something like that. It is interesting then that you can push it further, because those are the things that paranormal investigators kept saying the whole time. Even like people who almost got missing 411 style in the wilderness, who had some sort of weird incident, which again could be partially naturally generated weird phenomena. Is the problem. Like if you can have somehow naturally generated microwave blast, then a person who's completely healthy and fine and normal can just get momentarily crazy in a forest, because like that's just could happen, could be natural phenomenon that we don't really understand yet. So in this case, it's interesting to, like, if you keep pushing it and if you keep trying it again and again, and you keep track of all the ways in which the devices fail. So for instance, when you get to a point when the astronomers are trying to look through a patch of sky and their super advanced telescopes keep failing in a way that like the one star that I was just about to select to observe was permanently deleted from a non-networked hard drive of the telescope. Like that's probably not a natural phenomenon. Like, or like that's like there's some level of it that suggests intelligent interference. There's some level that would be explicable as just natural. So in this case, it's precisely because they keep observing it, trying stuff again and again, and things keep happening over and over. Then you're actually getting some sort of questions settled, and you're getting some actual data that have some scientific value, and then you can maybe start drawing conclusions from, or you can use to adjust protocols for future research. So even if they don't actually find out anything really about what that particular anomaly is, like what it is actually, what if it's like a different dimension alien witches or whatever, it's like if you don't find out, then they will definitely, by the end, if they do a couple more seasons, would have developed significantly protocols for researching these situations to at least be much more sure if something's a natural phenomenon in the future, or if you can rule out somehow if it is a weirder anomaly. Because like, if you just have, okay, so our instruments failed, then that's not enough information. If you set up the experiment in a way that the instruments would have to fail in a suspicious manner, then if you always do that, then you more often will get data of like, okay, but this failure was significant. It wasn't just a normal failure, it was a suspicious failure. And you would have a typology of failures of equipment or something. So for me, again, just the process is fascinating, and something that somebody should have done like publicly, because I'm pretty much sure somebody secretly did it. But like somebody publicly should have done a project like this 30 years ago.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that is showing how fast the world is changing, how much more acceptable and how much more common it is to do things open source and to do things kind of in an open manner, transparently. So I've got my fingers crossed that they will find some kind of conclusive evidence, or that we will make first contact at some point in the near future. That would be great.
Yeah, with Bill Cipher.
I just hope it's altruistic. I have to believe that if Bill Cipher was out there, if there was any negative or let's say evil UFOs out there, they would have conquered us long ago. Like I have to kind of believe that if they could conquer us, or if they wanted to conquer us, they would be able to. Like obviously, if they can get there, they're way stronger than us. They'd have no qualms about just enslaving all of us if they wanted to. So I have to assume that they're altruistic, that they're nice, that they have some kind of prime directive that keeps them from.
Well, I guess you could at least assume that there's some sort of dominant power in the surrounding area that's enforcing some sort of limits on exploitation.
Yeah, you have to assume that. Otherwise, they would have. They would have done it. It's not like they can't. It's not like they're waiting around for us to be just ready for exploitation. Like there's no way we could stop them. Like there's no way. If they wanted to. So
except with the paladin armor.
they would have some kind of laser that would melt you in your armor, I'm sure.
Yeah, just press a button, like switching from like Tesla attack to laser.
Yeah, done. Just nuke them with your laser. Whatever. Anyway,
just wanted to ask you just one thing. I wanted to ask you. So, was there any particular specific thing from the show that was interesting to you?
Well, particularly, I really like the concept that everything, the weather balloon and the rocket, that there is something in the air. That was definitely the core concept to me, that everything kind of radiated out from that one point. So that's definitely the biggest thing in my head is what could cause that? How could that actually, in my personal realm of what I know to be true and what I think might be true, how would I make sense of that? And so I definitely think there's something going on, assuming they're telling the truth. Like part of me says that maybe it isn't true at all. Part of me that skeptic in me says, okay, maybe they're just trying to pretend that it's true, and they're really good at pretending that it's true. So I still kind of have that maybe as a 5 to 10% possibility in there. But I'd like to believe that they're being honest. And that
I would definitely recommend you watch also the interviews with Travis Taylor.
Yeah, I haven't gone in that deep, so I'll keep going deeper. I just watched the first season, so I haven't gone deep into the other seasons as well. So I'm not super deep yet, but I'll continue to kind of explore. And
let's just say, without much spoiler, things are escalating.
Okay, and they're still making. Is the 4th season coming out soon? Do you know if they're making a 4th?
They filmed it, I think, because they're doing it always in the summer because of weather. So they're just filming it in the summer, and then next year they're usually posting it.
I'll definitely have to catch up and continue on. So I recommend it to anybody. Fast forward the parts that you're not interested in, and stick with the parts that you are. If it's not if it's a little too dry for you, but it is interesting, and I think
there's definitely nothing that compares.
Yeah,
that was ever filmed.
It's a very unique series. So check it out. Let us know what you think. And we're so glad that we could talk about it today. Thanks so much, Martin, for joining us. This is, I know, definitely something that you've got a lot more experience with than me as far as all the paranormal and fun things that are in the world and how it all relates together. So thanks for sharing your perspective on that. And we're excited. We've got like 3 or 4 new topics that we just kind of came up with in this topic today. So I don't think we'll ever run out of fun things to talk about on this channel. So thanks for joining us, everybody, today. And let's take what we have and make the best of it and continue to save the world together.